Hello and welcome everybody to the first official live stream that we are doing for Preptober week 1, kind of the first full week as we enter into Preptober and all of the madness that ensues with that, trying to figure out what you're going to be doing and how you're going to get to the end and set yourself up for success for Nano. As we authors know, Nano is that one time of year where we basically just lose ourselves to words and our sanity along with it. And one of the things that we are here to help you do as author coaches with the Wonderful Manuscripts YouTube channel is to help you guys be successful with your novels and to help you get to the point where not only have you planned it, written it, edited it, and you got to have that stutter there.
Edited it.
And also give you advice on how you can best submit your manuscripts or self-publish or whatever it is that your author goals are. But in order to help you do that, we actually need to talk about writing goals, because believe it or not, it is incredibly difficult to keep these things, even if you have set them, but sometimes just setting them up can be incredibly difficult. So as a quick reminder, I am S.D. Howard. I'm the author of the Christian fantasy novel, The City of Snow and Stars. We have Emily Vanderbent, the author of Crimson Time and Fractured Past. Zara Miller, I honestly don't know what your book was. What the name of your book was. Zara, what was the name of your book?
It's a young adult novel. I am Cecilia.
That's right. I got confused with the other one that you were telling us about on Friday. The one, yes, that's the one that I was blanking on. I apologize for that. Shows my memories like a goldfish. And then we have Kyran Dawkins, the author of The We and the They, and Mackenzie Finkley, the author of Beyond the Halls, An Insider's Guide to Loving Museums, and an upcoming fiction novel, The Artifact Hunter, which I'm super stoked about.
I feel like this was a fun quiz for you, Stephen. How well do you know your author friends?
Apparently not very well.
80%.
80%. I mean, it's not too bad, right? It's kind of like 80% of Facebook and everything it owns being down today.
T.
I know.
It's golden.
Too soon. All right, guys. So social media shenanigans aside, for most people, this is probably the most productive day that they've had in an entire year. I saw somebody who said that they had used a hammer and felt very accomplished. I too feel the same. Being accomplished, getting this stuff done, setting up, working with author coaches, it's a good time. Today, we are going to be talking specifically about your writing goals and how to get them set up. And we got a lot of really great topics that kind of all fit and work together with that. The first of which is going to be setting yourself up for success. Now, as someone who started off as a pantser, my first draft of my first novel was a complete dumpster fire and just kind of stream of consciousness. I'm just going to see what happens. It turns out that comes back around to bite you big time when you start writing the second draft and submit said second draft with a lack of world building to your publisher. And then both the acquisitions editor and your beta readers are like, hey, we need more world building. And you're like, oops, probably should have done that beforehand. So I have turned into more of a plantster. So I am a mixture of plotting, which I'm bad at, and pantsing, which it also turns out I'm really bad at. So I had to find this happy middle. Now, what I found incredibly helpful when I started this entire process was in the middle of revisions, which is not the best time to try and do that, if we're being honest, especially when you're on a publishing timeline. But I got my act together fairly quickly. And I was like, I need to structure my book. I need to set some sort of goal. And I need to figure out how I'm going to apply that goal. So, for instance, one of the things I looked at was how long do I want my average chapter to be? Um, Actually, that was kind of the very, very big picture. Zooming out even more, it was what do I want the final word count of my book to be, roughly? And I wanted 80,000 words. And then I was like, okay, well, how many chapters do I want to have in my book? 40. Because easy math I like easy math. So 2,000 words per chapter on average is what I needed to hit in order to hit that goal. Then it gets down to the chapter read time. So if I'm doing chapters around 2,000 words, that's approximately 10 minutes of read time for your average reader, who also happens to be you when you're going through edits. So surprise, surprise, 5,000 word long chapters are not fun to edit because it feels like an eternity working on the same chapter. So you actually want to set yourself up for success in this. So setting those writing goals helped me immensely because as soon as I saw that I was starting to make progress, my brain sent all of the happy little dopamine to the other parts of my brain and was telling it, we should do this more. So as you are making progress, your brain naturally starts rewarding you for it. And it's like, hey, we should do this more often. So it's actually setting yourself up for a huge, huge win when you're setting up goals. The other aspect of it is that it actually helps you know where you're at in the writing process. It helps you know what act you're in. I looked at my 80,000 word novel and I realized that 3 acts wasn't going to work because of the pacing. So I actually broke it up into a 4th act and suddenly all of the pieces clicked together. I wouldn't have known that had I not set previous goals of overall word count, chapter count, average chapter word count, and all of that I wouldn't have known. So this is one of the important aspects of setting goals. Now, that doesn't mean that you need to go and, create a list of like 20 goals, because honestly, at that point, you're not going to hit any of them. Let's just face it. Studies have shown that on average, if you set 1 to 3 goals, you will accomplish at least 2 of them. If you set anything above that, you'll accomplish 1. Anything above that, big old goose egg, nothing. So set yourself up for success. Be kind to yourself. That is why I recommend setting goals of overall word count for your book, the overall chapter count you want to have in your book. So that way you don't end up with this like 250,000 word monstrosity that each chapter is like 5,000 to 6,000 words long. And it's just don't do it. I've read books like that. I've edited books like that. And that is why I'm bald. So if you want to keep all your hair, don't do that. Okay. And third goal, give your reader an experience while reading your book. Okay. So you have to be purposeful with everything that you're doing. And the goals in setting these are where it starts. So typically pick your top 3 goals based on, that overall word count, the overall chapter count you want to have, and then how am I going to give the reader a awesome reading experience? Have those kind of be the 3 goals. The last one is a little bit more intangible because it differs so wildly from genre and author. But you'll be able to best figure out how to do that. Now, the next hardest part is actually sticking to it once you started. One of the ways that I recommend, especially for those of you who are like, I'm a pantser, like I'm intolerant, I have a very high intolerance to planning anything, because my creativity just has no bounds, which is partially true. The problem is that when you start going a little cray-cray with things and you just start throwing noodles at a wall to see what sticks, and you'd be surprised how many noodles will stick that don't necessarily need to be there. So when you're doing it and you're looking at this bigger picture, figure out what part you want to tackle first. So I'm currently working on book 2. And before I even started writing book 2, I had the first 10 chapters mapped out in my mind. Okay. But I did not start writing them. I sat down and I used Campfire Pro, which I absolutely love that program. And I used their timeline feature and I mapped out 10 chapters per act and got all of it. That took a considerable amount of time because of how much changed in book 1 from what I had initially planned, but it was worth it. So as you're going through and you're starting, think big. Okay. When you're setting your goals and saying, okay, I want 40 chapters per book, I'm going to map out on a big scale what each of those chapters look like, a general theme, one thing that may happen, but you don't get down to the nitty-gritty. You don't stifle the creativity by saying, well, I need to basically write out this entire chapter's plot. You don't have to do that. I don't do that. I don't recommend doing that. Give yourself kind of like those bullet points of just like, I want X, Y, and Z to happen. And then move on to the next chapter. Plan that. That makes it so much easier to actually stick to keeping with your goals. If you're saying, I can't write every single day, I can't do 500 words a day. Welcome to the club. I can't do 500 words a day. I can't do 500 words in a week sometimes. like it could take me 5 hours to get 500 words. So plan a time. Get it on your calendar as an actual event with a 30-minute buffer, no less than 10 minutes, but try and shoot for 30, leading up to your writing time. Be consistent at least once a week. Then if that once a week time rolls around and you're like, hey, all of my friends are wanting to go out, you know what? I have my writing time scheduled. Make it a priority. This is really kind of what it boils down to in setting yourself up for success with writing and setting those goals, is if you are not in any way making the time for writing, then you're always going to have aspiring next to author in your bio on Instagram. So don't do that. Make it that priority. That is my challenge for you. So that's just kind of the initial things of starting to set yourself up for success. I'm going to pass the baton to Kyra, who is going to be talking about the emotional importance of setting writing goals. And there is lots to this. So Kyra, take it away.
Thank you so much, SD. Appreciate you. Okay, y'all. Please be intentional about, a lot of what SD has already shared. Please be intentional about setting these goals in advance. Otherwise, you, like me, at some points in my writing journey, will find yourself in this kind of doom spiral of wondering what the heck is going on. Admittedly, that might happen at points in your writing journey, even if you do plan, but you can definitely decrease the incidence of that happening when you're intentional about setting goals that are attainable and healthy for you. So, to build off of what SD was sharing, which there are a couple of things you definitely don't want to do. So you see the WTF, which is, that very catchy like phrasing. You guys know what that usually stands for. But we use WTF to correspond to write tangible forecasts so that you can avoid the other WTFs of the writing process. So what you don't want to do is tell yourself that you're a failure if you don't reach a certain word count within a certain period of time. That's telling yourself that telling yourself that you failed is never productive in your creative process ever, which is why you want to establish word counts and establish thematic counts, as it were. So say, for example, the best way to describe this is how I went about writing my first book, The We and the They, for me personally. So when I wrote The We and the They, I told myself that I wanted it to be a relatively shorter book, almost borderline novella length, because my book was inspired by oral history. And if you're trying to tell somebody a story aloud, it's not going to be like epic length, because who's going to remember something that's an epic long? That's just not how oral tradition works. So I knew from the outset, a goal for myself was to keep the book at a relatively shorter word count. Something you guys need to know about me from the outset, ladies and gentlemen, and esteemed people of the audience, I'm a very verbose person. So when somebody saw that I wrote a short book, they were like, what? Kyra, you were concise? What's going on? So that writing that tangible forecast for me was establishing from the outset, this book is going to be shorter. Another thing that was an integral component of imbuing oral tradition into my book was that in oral tradition, especially if you guys have the opportunity to peruse oral tradition literature, you don't include a lot of dialogue in oral history books because people don't remember conversations verbatim. This is a specific stylistic choice that I had to remember from the outset of my drafting process. So that's another very important thing for you guys to bear in mind. So this is to say, as you're making goals, as you're making more general goals about approximate word counts and approximate chapter titles, also think about from the outset, what are choices that I want to make in my language that I want to be intentional about before I begin to draft? This is not to say like, oh, you want to, because I want to be careful in saying this because I and some of my colleagues have shared that there's something called the internal editor, that if you give yourself too many rules about your writing, that you won't allow yourself to actually put something on the page. But I still think it is important for you to be intentional about what you want to do with your words. Because at the end of the day, something that's been super helpful for me about writing tangible forecasts is imagining what I want to convey to the reader on the other side. So don't think that you're just word vomiting onto a page. You're conveying something and you're making intentional choices about that language. So in addition to what SD was saying earlier about establishing parameters for things like general word count goals, general chapter goals, and general like word counts per chapter goals, like on average, just so that you can maintain your sanity of like, wait, this chapter is 12,000 words long. That is not good. We need to fix this for my sake and for my reader's sake. Think about thematic goals as well. Think about, say, for example, you thought to yourself you were going to be able to write 30,000 words during NaNoWriMo. What if what you end up writing isn't 30,000 words, but it's 25,000 words, but you met your goal of reaching a certain plot point in your book? So in addition to aligning yourself to a potential word count goal, align yourself to where you want to be inside of your work in progress, because sometimes words are funny. You might end up using more of them than you expect, but you also might be using less of them than what you expect. What the message you convey is more important than the quantity of words on the page. So I think that the W2F, like sometimes it's weird to talk about tangible forecasts when words have both tangible and intangible effects on us as writers and the readers that we ultimately serve and enjoy interacting with. But maintain your sanity by following SD's advice about giving yourself like these parameters and metrics of word count overall, general chapter count, and general words per chapter count, but also remind yourself that the story and the style of your writing might surprise you in how those initial parameters ultimately are manifested in your draft.
I love that. And I think Mackenzie had a great question of, do you think there is such a thing as a failure when it comes to book writing?
No, I don't think so. I don't think there's anything. You could never fail. The only time when you fail is when you don't try. That sounds really cliche, but nothing. Yeah, the only thing that's a failure is when you talk yourself out of the pursuit. At the end of the day, if you're able to complete it and able to convey a mess, like you were true to your intentions, conveying a message to your readers, that's ultimately what matters. So I don't think there's such a thing as failure. I think the person, like, it's the most painful thing that could happen is when you, as the author, tell yourself that you fail, because that in and of itself is a very subjective assertion.
Yeah, that's true. I really like that, because I think far too many people would count themselves as a failure because they haven't hit sales, or they haven't, done that one thing that they really, really wanted to do with their book. And it's like, you know what, though? Like, you published a book. Like, that in itself is a huge victory, and not something that everybody can say that they have done. And yeah, the failure really stems from them going, I'm just going to throw in the towel. I'm going to give up this pursuit or dream that I have, and that ultimately would be where the failure is. Not, not making it rich, or, getting on Oprah. That doesn't constitute the failure. Giving up completely before you even got there or had the chance is really where that is.
Mm-hmm. I couldn't agree more. But I think that the biggest form of failure is self-sabotage. That's
yeah.
Yeah.
And as authors, it feels like we're doing that constantly. It's just like we're just like taking landmines and just like throwing them out in front of us at different variables, and then just waiting until we get them and go, oh.
Whether it's the inner critic or plot holes.
Yes.
Yes, plot holes. Yes.
I despise those things. Crop up everywhere. All right. I love that. It's so good. I think we need more remembering of how that goes. Emily, we're going to turn it over to you and talk about combating writing lull periods by preparing a comprehensive plan before they strike. I like the before they strike. It's like they're like little ninjas or something, just like waiting for their opportune moment to just jump out with a shuriken and just be like, "Hi!"
Honestly, though, that's what it feels like sometimes. But yeah, I mean, for me, before I can even think about sitting down and figuring out what the structure for my novel is, there's a ton of prep work that I have to do before that. So everything from world building, which for me includes a lot of research because I deal with history, character profiles, mood boards, which I love, and really like gathering anything else that I feel like I would need before I sit down and figure out what that structure looks like. I also know myself well enough to know that when I'm writing something creative, I don't work well off of a traditional outline or what I call a static outline. If I'm writing something academic, give me a static outline all day. But if I'm writing something creative, what I actually do is taking all of those things and all that prep work that I did beforehand, I sit down with note cards and I write every single thing that I know about the story on a note card. So this is everything from plot points to dialogue to character arcs to scene, anything. And I'll sprawl them on a table or across my floor and just keep moving them around until I get them in a in a form or a pattern or a flow that makes sense to me. And that will kind of operate as my outline. So I'll take them, I'll stack them up once I have that. I'll set them on my desk. When I get to writing, aside from obviously the first card, I'll have at least 3 in front of me at all times. So I'll have the card that I'm working on, I'll have the card that came before it, and the card that comes after it. And I might not use them all. Sometimes when you're writing, a character does something you didn't expect, or the plot takes a turn that you didn't necessarily plan ahead of time. So I'll set those cards to the side if something maybe doesn't feel like it fits there anymore, or maybe doesn't even feel like it fits in the story at all anymore. But I will keep those time. But I'll set those to the side. I'll use them in the next book. Like blank note cards next to me. Like I'll think of something as I'm writing that might feel like it would fit later on in the story, so I can weave those into my outline too. You think that like doing all of that would prevent me from having writer's block, but it doesn't. So when it does happen, I'll usually do one of 4 things to see if I can start like get the creative juices flowing again and spark something. So the first thing that I'll do is like a writing prompt. I have like a writing prompt book. Pop open Google to writing prompts and you'll get a ton. Really what it just does for me is like seeing words on a page, even if it has nothing to do with what I'm writing, seeing that I wrote something helps to get things flowing again. If that doesn't work, I'll do what I call a story dump. So I'll grab a pen, a piece of paper, and I'll set a timer for anywhere between like 2 to 5 minutes. And I'll write down everything that I know about what I'm stuck on. So if I'm stuck on a scene, I'll write in that 2 to 5 minutes everything that I'm stuck on, everything that I know about it. And then once that's done, I'll flip the page over and I'll write down everything that I don't know. So you get kind of both of those perspectives and you can kind of just let things flow. You're against a timer, so you're counting down and you're a little more apt to just let the word rather than let that self-editor kind of creep up. If that doesn't work, then I'll go to a style read, which really is just picking up a book by another author that you're familiar with and reading a part of their book that reflects whatever it is you're stuck on. So for me, for example, I always keep at least one of Cassandra Clare's books next to me. I really enjoy the way she does character development, her descriptions, her details. So if I feel like I'm stuck on a spot in my book that needs a little bit more of that, I'll open up to a chapter or to a section and read where she does that really well and try to emulate it, but in my own way for my own story. And then if that doesn't work, I will go to my mood board. If you don't have one at this point, make a mood board. It definitely helps. But I kind of make my mood boards as a part of all that like pre-prep process before I get to the structure part. So I'll open my mood board and just scroll through it, see if it sparks anything. It also helps if I'll like go down to Pinterest will like suggest pins based on kind of what it sees on your board. And oftentimes like there'll be pins down there that will spark things too. So yeah, usually doing one of those things will help spark something. But sometimes really the answer is you just need a break. You can't stare at a screen anymore. Maybe you've been writing the same thing for ages, and maybe no matter what you do, you just need that hour, that day, that week, whatever it is, just not looking at what you've been working on.
Yeah, taking breaks is super essential. Or even just taking that time to kind of think through an issue, a plot point, a particular character arc is is super important. Like writing chapter 12 of my book, I was stuck there for about a month to a month and a half because I had written myself into a corner and I had to think through all of the different variables, because it's not just like I can just throw this in here. It has a lasting impact, not only in book 2, but through book 3 and possible implications for later on. So, it sometimes you just have to take that time, step back from it. You're still thinking about it, but you're not necessarily doing like the active writing part of it. And Kyra had a fantastic question. How do you hear the voices of your characters telling your book to go in a different direction? That's happened to me, but I can't explain why.
Yeah, Kyra, I wish I could explain why too, but I do have a similar experience. I would say more so in the first book and that I'm working on right now, but yeah, you can plot and plan and outline to a T. But at the end of the day, your characters are going to do what they want to do and your story is going to go where it needs to go. So being the planner that I am, sometimes that like catches me off guard and I have to like take a step back. But like every time that I've had that happen and I've leaned into where it wants to go rather than what I planned it to go, it ends up being so much better than I could have planned it to begin with.
I've tried to explain this concept to people who don't write books, like my mom, for example. And she'll go, "What do you mean? You're the author. You're writing it." Like, it's a great point.
Yeah.
Am I, Mom? Am I? Or am I just documenting the stupid stuff that my characters do all day long? The answer is both.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I love the not doing it like a static outline. That's actually what I do in Campfire. Is you basically create events and then I arrange them in a linear fashion. But when a character does something or I realize something's off, I can move it and I can readjust it and I can give it a color designation. Like green is for all the chapters that I've written. Orange is for a chapter that I was like, I don't know if this is going to end up making it in the final draft or not. But outlines really should, and I think especially for those who pants, it allows them that flexibility to not be like, okay, well, this has to be what it is. And, if my characters start going a route that I like better, that's still within the same story arc, is just a different take on it, then I can go that route. Because I'm not like just saying, this is it, nothing can change. And for plotters, it gives them an opportunity to be like, hey, I actually can go a different route if I'm writing, and it's not going to completely destroy my entire outline for this thing because I'm still working within those constraints. It gives enough of a structure for both to allow, actually, I think, more creative freedom on both sides, because you have that little bit of give either way. But yeah, as far as characters go, they just do what they want. Two of my characters, just getting ready to start writing chapter 14. And the characters were like, hey, by the way, we're not going to be with everyone else by the end of book 2. And I'm like, I'm sorry, what? That's not the plan. It is now, but it wasn't initially. But it's those types of things, and it's actually going to improve the overall story. But if I didn't have an outline to play with, I'd just be in a corner somewhere just sobbing. So, okay, we're going to move on to the next part. So some, for mapping out scenes and to get around writing block, Zara, I want you to jump in here and kind of give us your take and your advice on how to do that effectively.
Yes. Well, first of all, yes to everything that Emily said. I concur with all affirmation statements. I'm also an old soul, so I use index cards. I think that they will make you feel connected to your story in a very personal way, so definitely use them. What I want to add is the least productive thing you can do is to model setting your goals according to the influencers or your idols. As much as we want to be inspired by successes of others, goal setting is such a specific topic that only knowing yourself fully will do the trick. I love Stephen King and I admire his work ethic, but I'm not carved out to write 500 to 1,000 words a day. I'm an episodic writer, which means I write sporadically in large chunks, and if I follow his advice to a fault, I'm gonna end up disappointed in myself. In fact, a lot of writing prejudice comes from people, writers, authors modeling their behavior after three famous writers they know and not enlarging their spectrum of literary knowledge. So you have Stephen King, who's done nothing and can't afford to do nothing but write 1,000 words a day since 1874. And then you have an opposite extreme, George R. R. Martin, who writes one book in 8 years and also can afford to do so. These writers have set goals that work for them career wise, work life balance wise, etc. So we definitely look up to their art, but not necessarily their lifestyles, because um, a lot of writing blocks stem from the feeling of not being or feeling adequate enough to write because you are overwhelmed your by your idols, by the influencers in literature. So when it comes down to how I set my goals, when I only have half the story in mind, I don't, and you shouldn't, because that just puts more pressure on your psyche and makes you want to give up. Not having every plot point figured out is the greatest gift the higher power could bestow upon you because it's the ultimate imagination stimulator. Having every character's arc, scene, and dialogue prepared robs you of a wonderful, spontaneous roads your characters in your story can hit. So, a huge part is letting go of that aspect and trust your instinct that you reach that point. When you reach that point, you'll know what to do. And if you don't, well, you can still go back to your notes, everything that you've structured before it, as Emily pointed out, to the parts that you did sketch out and did prepare. And I guarantee you, it will hit you. You'll know what will make sense for that particular character to do next. A part of bridging a writing block is to educate yourself about literature and learning different styles that you can borrow from. Forget about plagiarism. There is no such a thing as plagiarism in creative writing. Hence, as bad as it is, Twilight and 50 Shades of Grey, right? Everyone knows that 50 Shades of Grey is a ripoff of Twilight. Is anyone persecuting anyone? No. And it's largely successful. So plagiarism is a thing that's been hammered into us since an early age in school, from like in academic setting. That's not a thing in creative writing, so forget about that. And definitely keep a book on your desk that you love. That helps me as well. And yeah, I think that would be my input for today.
Love it. And Mackenzie had a great question of how do you cope with writer's block?
That's an excellent question. I fall back on my tip would be to fall back on someone who's not a writer. Legit, my mom is a physicist slash chemist. She couldn't write a coherent sentence of creative writing if she had a gun to her head. That's her words. So when I talk to her, it comforts me and it soothes me, because just the like her style of communication is so different from mine, because she has a scientific mind and I don't at all. And then she randomly says some hilarious thing about what she did that day or what happened to her at school, and it just propels me to write. I built off of that. So the worst thing you can do is shut yourself off from the world. My favorite example that I also mentioned at the last live stream was to go Phantom of the Opera mode. Famously, Phantom started murdering people because he was alone writing. So you don't want to go homicidal on people. So yeah, fall back on whoever it is that you need to fall back on, your loved ones, and that should do the trick.
Really good. All right, we're going to transition now to Mackenzie. So, kind of like the final set of advice, how to make goal setting fun and exciting. Because for those of us whose minds are just like, I don't want to do it, it can seem more of a chore than something that is. And I think that's why a lot of people don't end up making or setting goals, is because it's more of a chore. It feels like this isn't part of the creative process. What would you have for advice for them?
Absolutely, I do have words to say on this one here. And I think Zara made an excellent point and an excellent segue to this one, which is talk to people about it. That's going to keep things fun. Talk to people about the goals that you have for your book, the plot, things you have planned to write, difficult situations that you and your characters have found yourselves in. I find that not only does this keep me motivated to write, but it's just fun trying to explain the things that go on in my brain and the things that go on in the book with other people. And it's also really fun and a nice little dopamine boost when people get excited about what you're talking about and they engage with you in conversation. So that's going to keep things fun. And it's also fun when, no matter what word count goal you have set for yourself, if you tell someone your word count goal who doesn't write books, they're going to go, wow, that's a lot of words. No matter what word count goal you have. And you're automatically going to feel better about yourself. Even if you're worried, like maybe my word count isn't enough, I'm comparing myself to other people. Don't do that. You're automatically going to feel so much better about that goal and how you're progressing towards it. The other thing too, and I think Zara made a really good point to me earlier today, not only talking to people about your goals, you can share them with your pets. You can read them out loud to your pets or stuffed animals and act out your goals and your dreams. I think that that's a really fun and whimsical suggestion, and I couldn't go without mentioning it. So in addition to hopping on this train to talking to people about your goals, I think it's a really important part of writing and producing books. And I'll go into this by saying, like, when I started with my nonfiction book, last thing I wanted was for the book to sound like a textbook, right? Because then people aren't going to read it, because I'm not selling a textbook. That's not what this is. And the biggest piece of that is making sure that there's a narrative, there's storytelling. Storytelling keeps people engaged. And that's the reality no matter what genre you're writing in. And so the biggest piece of storytelling is going and listening to other people's stories. So a huge part of writing that nonfiction book was going out and interviewing people in all these different fields and places that I wanted to gather more information on, interviewing curators, exhibit designers, archivists, and all those things, looking for stories about their museum experiences or funny things that happened to them in a museum or things behind the scenes. And that's what the readers want to get a glimpse at. Their eyes start to glaze over when you go into like essay mode and argumentative critical thinking about current events. But when you get that behind the scenes story about the time a kid took a bite out of an exhibit because they thought it looked tasty, but it was made of styrofoam, that's funny. That's entertaining. And I carried that over into the same concept when I was trying to write fiction, because I really didn't know where to begin when I started character building, world building, trying to figure, like I knew generally the premise of the book, but then I was like, okay, I know I have an archivist, but I'm going to be honest, I have no archival experience. Like I've met an archivist, but I really want to know more about what they do in their day-to-day jobs. So I went and I interviewed one. I found someone on the internet who worked at the Smithsonian Archives, and I was like, hey, can I talk to you about your job? And that was a really productive and really fun conversation to have. And they got excited about my book, which I thought was really sweet because they don't have to, right? So that's like another little dopamine self-esteem booster there. So that's my 2 cents on how to keep things fun and exciting is engage with other people. And the last piece that I'll leave off on this, because it's not so much advice, because it's a little bit of a procrastination habit that I have, but it can be productive, is making TikToks about your book journey and sharing them with people. Because just like watching that word count go up, watching that like count go up is like, oh yeah, this is good. And I think it's a really fun, another really fun way. The point being, share your journey with other people and bring other people into your life and into your writing journey, like you're doing right now, hopefully by watching this live stream, right? That's my 2 cents.
I like that. I think because I've watched your TikToks, and as they pop up on my Instagram feed, and they just bring me so much joy. The Library of Alexandria one is obviously like top notch. We all feel that in the feels. The traditional publishing one that you did just recently was absolutely hilarious. And yeah, I think as writers, we also have to remember that we're doing this because it's fun. Like,
we're not doing this because anyone's making us.
Right. Yeah. It's like someone's just like, write my book. Now, granted, if you've written a book and people are waiting for a book too, then yes, you do have people with like cattle prods being like, where's my book? I want my book, yo. It can get to that point, which is also like a really good problem to have. But we tell stories because we have to tell stories. We have to tell the stories. Otherwise, it's going to drive us nuts. All the characters that are talking to us in our heads all day long. It's just like, we got to do something with them. So might as well try and make some money off of these guys. Like, they're not doing me any good, just trapped up there in my head. But yeah, doing things that are fun, seeing, I think some of the biggest mindset shifts that I've seen, whether they're from people who are going through, the NDP publishing program, or authors that I've talked to who just are trying to figure out what they're supposed to do next, is don't see it as a drag. Like, yeah, the writing portion is a lot of fun, but so is the planning aspect, especially if you're doing it like with the intentionality of like, I want to give my reader this, whatever that is for you. That is what keeps your passion burning when you hit those roadblocks. What I've told people is that for book one, what I wanted to give people was an experience, a bingeable reading experience, so that I then curated the book to be able to do that. And I've had no less than 7 people that have reached out to me and are like, I finished this book in a day. Like, and I've never finished a book in a day before. I had one person finish it in 97 minutes, and currently they're the record holder. I don't see that changing anytime soon. But like, that's how I knew I did my job right. That is fun for me, to see the stuff that I planned for my readers land with the readers. So every aspect of this can be fun, from the planning to the writing to the editing, which, everybody can get into the perfectionist when it comes to the editing side of things. But if you keep in mind what that ultimate goal is, I want to give my reader this, that helps through the editing as well, because it helps you know whether you're on pace or not. So I love the conversation that we've been having. Super, super good. One of the kind of the last things here that just to kind of throw it out to everyone who is watching now and will be watching later is, do you prefer to plan or to pants your books? And why? Like, why do you like that? I'm now in a place where I prefer to, like I'm a plantster. So I'm doing a little bit of plotting, just enough to give me a sandbox to play in. And then I just kind of let my imagination go ham. That's what I found has worked really well for me. It gives my characters a little bit too much creative free reign. So, there's always pros and cons. But let's be the first ones to kind of answer this real quick. So, Emily, let's start with you. Do you prefer to plan or pants or somewhere in between?
So I would also consider myself a planster, but leaning a little bit more toward the planning side. I definitely need structure. I cannot just sit down and hope it goes well, because it will not. But I also like to have a decent amount of structure that lets me know where I'm going. But when, exactly like we talked about earlier with Kyra, when the characters start speaking and the story feels like it needs to go somewhere else, I like to lean into that.
Nice. Zara, how about for you?
That's an interesting question because my brain kind of decides that for me. Like when I was younger, I thought I was schizophrenic because I had all these stories prepared from start to finish in my head, and I heard them, and I needed to get them out on paper. And when I was younger, I did have more time to actually write down and plan more. But now I would agree with Emily that are in the middle. So I have an overall structure from start to finish in my head that I don't need to write down, that I just kind of remember and go with. And then there are smaller things, smaller details, quirks about my characters, or tender moments between them that I want to write down because there's something very specific about it that will circle back, that I'll circle back to in the plot. So, yeah, planter, I guess.
Nice. And Mackenzie, how about you?
I would say I'm a planner, like flat out, and that's not just because I learned for the first time today really what pantsing meant in the context of writing. And really learning that it's just like fly by the seat of your pants when it comes to like actually sitting down and writing with the words. Yeah, that couldn't be me. I like to plan a lot. When I first had the idea, there was like, idea. And I wrote down kind of like 15 pages of what the plot looked like, who were the major characters, and the big ideas I wanted to address in like a journal. I'm not talking like 15 Word document pages. I'm talking like 15 of those pages, right? It was a bunch of bullet points, a bunch of questions, and a bunch of movie references, right? And then you get down to trying to outline the characters. Before I can write the story, I felt like I needed to get a sense of who the people were who were interacting with one another. And that actually makes writing the story a lot easier for me. But then, going and interviewing people who share lived experiences with the people that I'm trying to write so I can get a better sense of who they are. All these little planning elements. And then I get down to actually start writing. And then it kind of gets to a part where I sort of plan as I go. Like I'll start writing the book and then I'll go, oh, you know what? In a couple of chapters, this is going to happen. So I'll go and make a note on that chapter outline so that way, when I finally arrive to that chapter, I like have this kind of handful of spaghetti noodles that have been thrown at the wall about, what the characters might be doing in this chapter, where they are, and what is the major plot point that I want to address for that chapter. So there's planning as I go, but there's definitely not just writing from nothing.
Nice. And Kyra, how about for yourself?
I feel like this is a bit of a cop-out answer, but it really does depend on the writing project that I'm doing. For for my first book, Louis and the They, I was definitely more of a planner until I wasn't. Let me explain. So I wrote what I thought was the first draft, and then I was like, oh, wait a minute. Here's an idea. And then that changed everything. So I went back and like incorporated this idea throughout, which was helpful because I was able to like make subtle connections and put in Easter eggs and stuff, which was fun. But yeah, so my first book, okay, so there's kind of like this false dichotomy of like more plot driven books versus more character driven books. I don't really think that that dichotomy fully exists, but it is helpful for because strong books have character driven and plot driven elements, but it was helpful for me in my drafting process to sort of rationalize how I navigated writing certain sections and like, you know, articulating the plot. So the we and the they, I guess if you were to adopt the whole false dichotomy of plot driven versus character driven, it was definitely a lot more plot driven in how I planned it because I was like, these are the moments that are going to happen. This person is going to die. Not really a spoiler. Y'all know that people die on the first page of the book, but this is how this person's going to die, and this is how that person's going to die, etc. I promise I'm a nice person, guys. I promise. So the we and the they was much more like planned out because it was more plot driven, even though ironically all of that plot was profoundly changed by a character, again rendering that idea of the dichotomy obsolete. Now my current book that I'm working on, Azara Ablaze, is much more quote character driven. She's a 19-year-old girl who turns 20 in the course of the book, so you know her mind is chaotic. So the plot is like a lot. I've had this character in my heart and mind since I was 15 years old. So she's been here for a minute, you know, and I feel like this book feels a bit more pantsed. Like I did still have like a plan for where the plot was going, but it was a lot more of a sketch in comparison to how I plotted The We and the They, because Zara is a 19-year-old girl who likes to light things on fire. I'd imagine that things are a little unpredictable, right? So I want to apologize if this
She has an arson for a hobby.
A little bit, just a little bit. So I guess I don't mean for this to be like a cop-out answer, but for me it depends on the project, because I feel like each writing experience is different, even for an author to author, which is another thing that I just quickly want to say. If you guys are going into NaNoWriMo and you've written a book before, you've written a long-term writing project before, and you're expecting for this experience to be the exact same as the last one, don't expect that. Be flexible to what works for you. And a lot of us can attest to how things evolve because stories change. You change as a person. Life changes. So just be flexible and allow yourself to lead into what's comfortable, not what you expect for yourself.
Yeah, that's so good. And I like the pointing out like, plot driven versus character driven. Because it's like, yeah, it's like it's not one or the other. It's more of just kind of like, what percentage of the story is going to be kind of more weighty in that area versus like completely one or the other. And it being on a story by story basis. Like I write flash fiction and I don't plan those. It literally just their ideas, and I just sit down and I'm like, I'm just gonna write out 500 words or somewhere in that neighborhood and just kind of see what happens, see where that particular story takes me. There's no planning for that. It's just seeing what happens. Doing this Preptober and Nano for 4 short stories. Never written a short story outside of fan fiction. And so like this is an entirely new playground in which to play, and it will look very different from my novel writing process. So yeah, because even just like it's a completely different mental headspace to do a short story versus a full-length novel, because you have to condense certain things. There's only so much you can do within, 10,000 words as a cap for a short story. So I think that's great advice for authors out there who are just like, this just is going to be the same thing forever. No. The more you read, the more you write, the more you practice and hone your craft, the better your writing will become, and it will look different as you go. The way that you do that, the processes by which you do that will look different, and it's okay. It's just a matter of being aware that, like, hey, this will happen. I'm reading Beowulf for the first time, and I'm like, I'm loving all of the things that have to do with little Scandinavian guys just being like, let's just rip arms off of monsters and drink meat. That is going to somehow make it into future future works. Let those things inspire you to change and grow and become a better writer. So gonna transition now to wrapping this up here real quick. So we have officially launched into Preptober, the first full week of Preptober. This Thursday, October 7th, we're going to be doing another coaching panel on how to pick our first coaching panel on how to pick a winning title for your book. So that way you don't end up naming your book something uber generic and it gets lost in the vast array of novels that are on Amazon. Because guess what? That's probably where you're going to be publishing. That's where 80% of people publish their books. So we're going to talk about what makes something a good title for your book. So that way it can help you stand out. Even if it is something that is very similar or the exact same in terms of a title, sometimes even just throwing a series name or a subtitle on there is all that it takes. So we'll go through that on Thursday. And then next week, we're going to talk about, so next Monday, talking about creating your outline, some of the tools that you can use, whether it's sticky notes or things like Campfire Pro. We'll kind of do a quick rundown of those things so that way you guys have a idea of what is out there, what's available to you, and how you can use it to start really prepping and preparing for a successful NaNoWriMo this year. All right, guys. We wish you all the best of luck, and we will see you guys on Thursday and next Monday. Take care, everybody.